Karen complained about my dog. I'm the local veterinarian. I never thought I'd be accused of harboring a violent animal when the so-called threat was my 12-year-old Labrador. Archie, a dog who once nursed an injured rabbit back to health by licking its wounds gently for days. But then again, I never expected to move next door to Karen Delgado, the self-appointed president of a fake HOA, either. We'd only been in Rosewood Pines for 6 weeks when it happened. I'm Dr. Elena Rivera, a board-certified veterinarian with 17 years of experience, 3 rescue pets, and a scar down my forearm from wrestling a German shepherd out of a burning shed. I'd moved here with my son, Mateo, after my divorce. I needed quiet, space, and a fresh start. Mateo needed a place where he could ride his bike without getting run off the road by commuters. Rosewood Pines looked perfect on the brochure tree-lined streets, craftsman-style homes, and what they called a tight-knit community spirit. But the real spirit of this place had frosted lips and a clipboard. Karen Delgado introduced herself on day 1 with a pamphlet titled Rosewood Resident Standards. It had no legal letterhead, no government affiliation, just a stock photo of a mailbox and some bolded text about noise levels, lawn maintenance, and pet behavior. I skimmed it, smiled politely, and thanked her. She squinted at my dog, who was napping in the moving truck, and asked, "Is that a pit bull?" "No." I said, "He's a lab mix. He's 12. Very calm. Karen smiled, but it was the kind of smile you'd paint on a mask for Halloween. "I'll keep my eye on him," she said. I should have known then, but I didn't. I was too busy unpacking, adjusting, trying to ease Mateo into a new school and balance my schedule at the clinic. Our backyard wasn't fenced yet, but Archie was always on a lead or beside me. Always. Still, the notes started coming. First, it was dog barking during daytime hours. Disruptive. Then, unleashed animal sighted, possibly yours. Please respect community expectations. And finally, one printed in all caps and taped to my door. We warned you. Last strike. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know who we was. But I was starting to understand that Karen had crowned herself queen of a kingdom no one had elected her to rule. Mateo found the next clue. He came home from school holding a flyer that read, Community Pet Safety Meeting. Discussion on aggressive breeds. She handed these out in the car line, he said, frowning. She told the principal, your dog has dangerous energy. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I'd spent my entire life caring for animals. I'd stitched wounds, removed tumors, cried over euthanasia decisions. And now, a woman with no veterinary background was slandering my dog in front of my kid. I took a deep breath and told myself not to escalate. But the next morning, escalation came to me. At 7:03 a.m., 2 animal control officers knocked on my door. Ma'am, one said, shifting awkwardly, we got a complaint of an aggressive canine making threats to community members. Making what I asked. Stunned. Did they say how he made threats? The officer glanced at his clipboard, sighed, and said, barked at someone. Repeatedly. From behind a gate, Archie was asleep in his bed. I invited them in, showed his tags, vaccination records, and temperament logs from my clinic. They nodded, apologized, and said, honestly, we get a lot of these. Karen's filed 3 this month alone. She has no legal authority. I said. The younger officer gave a half smile. That hasn't stopped her yet. I didn't know it then, but I was about to become her next full-scale project. Later that week, while I was at work and Mateo was at school, Karen walked onto my property and took photos of Archie through the kitchen window. I only knew because my neighbor, Mrs. Simmons, texted me a blurry photo of Karen standing on my porch holding a tape measure. Thought you should know, she said. She said she's gathering evidence. I filed a report for trespassing. Karen responded by dropping a cease and desist letter in my mailbox. On it was a fake HOA seal and a warning that failure to comply with behavioral standards will result in escalation. When I confronted her, she waved her phone in my face. You think just because you're some dog doctor that the rules don't apply to you? She hissed. That animal growled at me yesterday. He was inside, I said calmly. You were on my porch. I felt unsafe, she said, her voice rising. And I'm not the only one. People are afraid to walk their kids past your house. I looked around. The street was empty. A squirrel ran by. You're the only person who's ever had a complaint. I said, my dog isn't a threat, but you walking onto my property without permission is. Karen's eyes narrowed. We'll see what the sheriff says. Then she stormed off. 2 days later, the sheriff did show up, but not to arrest me, to play fetch with Archie. Sheriff Lynn had been one of my longtime clients at the clinic in town. Her retriever, Lucy, had just recovered from knee surgery, and I'd done the work myself. She knocked on the door, smiling. Karen called in a dog terrorizing the block complaint. She said, wanted us to do a full behavioral seizure. I figured I'd come check things out myself. Archie trotted over, tail wagging. Lynn laughed and tossed him a tennis ball. Then she leaned in and whispered, that woman's got 3 open nuisance complaints already. If she pushes further, we'll be knocking on her door next time. I smiled and exhaled for the first time in weeks. But Karen wasn't done, not even close, because 2 nights later, someone threw raw meat over my fence. Archie didn't eat it, thank God, but I had it tested. It was laced with crushed ibuprofen and chicken bones, poisonous to dogs, potentially fatal. I froze. That was no longer a Karen tantrum. That was attempted animal cruelty, and it meant war. The day after I found the poisoned meat, I couldn't sleep. I'd bagged the evidence and driven it myself to the vet hospital where I sometimes did emergency work. The lab tech ran the test without question. I called Mateo's school and told them he'd be late. Then I sat Archie down in the living room and checked him for any signs of nausea, swelling, or agitation. Nothing. Thank God. But I couldn't ignore the intent anymore. This wasn't just harassment. It was a crime. When Officer Davis arrived at my house that morning, he took one look at the evidence bag and said, Dr. Rivera, do you have any enemies? I looked out the window. Karen was standing on her porch, watering her geraniums in a perfectly pressed cream blouse. Just one, I said. He followed my gaze and sighed. Let me guess. She's behind your complaints too. She's behind everything, I said. But unless she left fingerprints or video footage, it's her word against mine. Davis nodded. We'll do our due diligence. Can you send over any security footage? That's when it hit me. I hadn't installed my cameras yet. I'd ordered them top-of-the-line Nest system, but they'd been sitting unopened in my garage. I swore under my breath. We'll canvass the neighborhood, Davis said, but keep your dog inside and keep any future incidents documented. If she so much as raises her voice, I want to know. Mateo was shaken. Is Archie going to be okay? He asked at breakfast, his fork idle in a pile of scrambled eggs. He already is, I said. But this means we have to be smart. We have to watch our backs. And our lawn. He nodded slowly. Why does she hate us? I gave the only honest answer I could. Because she thinks she can control us. And when she can't, it scares her. Over the next week, things only got stranger. Karen started walking past our house twice a day, pretending to talk on the phone, but pausing just long enough to stare into our windows. She began clipping her hedges aggressively at 7 a.m. on Saturdays, tossing leaves onto our side of the yard. Then came the letters, mailed in stamped envelopes with no return address, all printed from the same cheap laser printer. Dogs like yours shouldn't be in family neighborhoods. We're watching you. Your license is just a piece of paper. I logged everything. I saved every envelope. I installed my security system and pointed 3 cameras at the front walk. But I also started digging, because if Karen was going to come for me, I needed to know what exactly gave her this illusion of power. I started with the Rosewood residence standards she'd passed out. After a little research, I learned Rosewood Pines had no official HOA, no legally filed bylaws, no governing body registered with the city or county, which meant her rules were fake, so were her fines. but she had enforced them through shame and intimidation for years. A few neighbors started quietly speaking up. Mrs. Simmons told me Karen once forced a single mom to remove a backyard trampoline for aesthetics. A man named Theo said Karen had filed noise complaints when he practiced saxophone in his garage, then slashed his tires when he refused to stop. Another neighbor, Camilla, whispered, "I don't let my daughter walk past her house. She once told her, 'You're too loud to live here.' She's 8, and yet no one had ever challenged her. Not publicly, not legally, until now. One night, I came home from the clinic to find Matteo sitting in the dark with Archie on his lap. He looked up and said, 'She left a note again.' I turned on the light and saw it folded neatly on the counter. The ink was shaky, almost angry. 'If your animal attacks anyone, you'll be liable. I've spoken to lawyers.' That was the last straw. I picked up the phone and called Sheriff Lynn. 'We're not just dealing with a nuisance,' I told her. 'She's poisoning animals, harassing my son, creating a fake government.' Lynn listened silently, then said, 'Send me every complaint, every letter, every photo. We'll get the DA involved.' And Elena, 'Yeah, be ready. If we push her, she'll try to burn the whole thing down.' I filed for a restraining order the next morning. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I posted one of Karen's anonymous letters online on my clinic's Facebook page. Not to provoke her, just to warn the community. But what happened next blew up bigger than I expected. The post went viral, over 700 shares, hundreds of comments, dozens from other towns. Turns out, Karen had lived in 2 other neighborhoods before Rosewood Pines, and she'd pulled similar stunts there too, only back then. People were too afraid to speak up. One woman wrote, "She tried to have my therapy dog removed." Another said, "Karen tried to fine me $500 for having a clothesline." She made her own envelopes. A vet tech from a neighboring town posted. "She showed up to our clinic once and demanded we euthanize a puppy that barked too much. When we refused, she called corporate. It was her neighbor's puppy. I didn't know whether to be furious or relieved, but I knew I wasn't alone." Then came the breaking point. Late one night, after a long shift, I pulled into my driveway to find my front yard covered in raw chicken. Dozens of pieces, legs, wings, gizzards scattered across the grass like someone had tried to start a poultry war. A single note was pinned to my mailbox. "This is what happens when you ignore rules." The cameras caught her, crystal clear. Her face, her license plate, her throwing technique. I emailed it all to Sheriff Lynn, and then I posted the clip online. The caption was simple. "This woman is not a president. She is a predator." The video hit 100,000 views by morning. And Karen. She was about to learn what happens when a veterinarian fights back. Karen went quiet for 2 days after the video went viral. Not a single note. No fresh chicken parts. No fake citations taped to my mailbox. I could tell it was killing her. Neighbors started whispering louder now openly, not just behind fences. A few knocked on my door. Some brought their own screenshots. Some brought cookies. And one brave soul, a teacher named Priya who lived 2 houses down, brought records. "I don't know if this helps," she said, handing me a binder, "but she tried to fine me for my solar panels last year. She made this whole spreadsheet, said she represented a neighborhood standards board. This is all fake, right?" I thumbed through the pages, dozens of them. Fake bylaws, imaginary complaint forms, even one labeled "Sanction Warning, Dr. Rivera." That one stung, but it also proved something. Karen wasn't just a meddler. She was trying to govern people without consent, without authority, without legality. And now, we had receipts. Sheriff Lynn called the next day. "DA's interested." She said, "In what way?" And pressing charges. Harassment, impersonation of a public officer, possibly cruelty to animals depending on toxicology. That word impersonation rang like a bell. Fake cops, fake letters, fake rules, fake power. It wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. But Karen wasn't done. Because the night before our court hearing, I came home to find my garage door wide open. The security feed showed it had been yanked manually by someone in a hoodie, right after I left for the clinic. Nothing was stolen, but all my dog crates were turned upside down. My leashes dumped into a kiddie pool. My rosewood pet rescue sign slashed with a knife. Mateo's bike was knocked over. Archie was hiding under the kitchen table when I got in. That night, I made the call I'd been dreading. To my ex-husband, Brian. "Hey," I said, trying not to choke. "Can Mateo stay with you for a few nights?" He didn't ask questions, just said, "Of course. I'll pick him up in the morning." I wanted my son safe because I was done playing defense. At court the next day, Karen showed up in a pearl blazer and carried a binder thicker than the Bible. She smiled like we were old friends, even winked. I didn't blink. She tried to argue that I was the aggressor, that I'd weaponized social media and endangered her life, that my dog was a known terror and bred for violence. Archie, a 70-pound golden retriever mix who wagged his tail at houseflies. My lawyer, Holly Tran, laid out every photo, every letter, every screen grab of Karen hurling giblets onto my lawn. Karen tried to claim performance art. The judge rolled her eyes. 30 minutes later, we walked out with a 6-month restraining order and a formal referral for criminal investigation. That should have ended it. But for people like Karen, shame only fuels them. The following week, she created a Facebook group. It was called Protect Rosewood from Dangerous Dogs. It had 3 members, her, some guy in Florida, and one of those faceless troll accounts. She started posting pictures of random dogs with warning across the top. None were Archie. She called local animal shelters pretending to be me. She posted a flyer around the block with my home address and the words "unlicensed animal dealer. Proceed with caution." This time, it wasn't just annoying. It was criminal defamation. So I filed again, and the community, they rallied. First, it was the college student next door who ran a drone photography business. He offered to fly daily over Karen's property to catch any more sabotage. Then Priya made a public post and open letter to Rosewood residents. It read, "Dr. Rivera is not the problem. She is the reason our pets are still alive, our kids still safe. Karen does not represent us. She never did. And it's time we all admit it." It got 400 comments and turned into a petition. People from all over the county signed it. Then came the local paper. A reporter named Sarah Lopez called me. "We've had our eye on Karen for a while." She said, "You just gave us the proof." That Friday, the headline read, "The Woman Who Tried to Fine, a town inside one neighborhood's fake HOA scandal." With a side photo of me holding Archie and Mateo beside me, arms crossed. Karen was furious. How did I know she showed up at my clinic pretending to be a client and demanded an exorcism for her neighbor's dog? My receptionist, bless her, smiled, dialed the sheriff, and stalled her long enough for a deputy to arrive. Karen was escorted off the premises. That was the last straw. The town was ready. What happened next felt like a storm rolling in. Sheriff Lynn showed up to her house with a search warrant. They took boxes, binders, letters, printer paper, even some of those fake HOA badges Karen had made. Turns out, she'd created an entire system in her basement, complete with files on nearly every resident. Notes like, "Mr. DeLuca walks shirtless, minus points. Unit 6 dog barks at 3 p.m., possible youth request later." Rivera threat level red. It was like a villain's diary. She was charged that same week. Impersonation of an officer, harassment, attempted animal abuse, trespassing. They offered her a plea deal, but she refused, said she'd represent herself. The trial was set for 3 months later, and Karen doubled down. She tried starting a newsletter from jail, wrote to local newspapers calling us a suburban cult, claimed Mateo wasn't my real son, tried to sell interviews to conspiracy podcasts, but no one was listening anymore. The spell had broken, because a community, when united, is louder than any fake badge. By the end of the month, a new sign stood at the edge of the Rosewood entrance, Rosewood Pines. "Community by kindness." Not control, I didn't write it. Priya did, but they asked me to hang it. And I did Archie at my side, Mateo filming it for his school project titled How My Dog Defeated a Dictator. It wasn't just a joke. It was history. The trial began on a crisp Monday morning in late September. Small-town courtrooms don't usually draw crowds, but by 8 a.m., the benches were full. People stood in the back, leaning against walls. Local news vans lined the street outside, their antennas stretching toward the sky like steel fingers itching for scandal. And Karen, she walked in like she was the guest of honor. Pearl blazer, crimson lipstick, an oversized binder tucked under her arm, and a smugness so thick you could choke on it. She waved at people like they were her subjects. I watched her take the stand, swear to tell the truth, and then without missing a beat begin spinning a web so absurd it would have made a cat laugh. She claimed she was acting on behalf of an informal neighborhood standards alliance, said she had verbal support from over half the block, said my dog had charged at her and growled with death in his eyes. Archie, who once got scared of a butterfly. The courtroom snickered. Even the judge had to clear her throat to hide a smirk. But it stopped being funny when Karen introduced her binder. She called it the evidence of neighborhood decline. Inside were photos of Archie, zoomed in until his pupils looked demonic. Screenshots of Facebook posts she'd edited to look threatening. A fake HOA map she'd hand-drawn to claim my home was within her jurisdiction. The judge narrowed her eyes. Ms. Whitmore, she said, do you realize impersonating a housing authority is a crime? Karen didn't blink. It's not impersonation if no one else is doing the job. That was her whole argument. She believed we needed control, and since no one else volunteered, she'd appointed herself queen. The prosecution wasn't having it. They brought in neighbors, real people, with real testimonies. Priya described how Karen tried to stop her solar installation and threatened to report her to the energy board. DeLuca testified about Karen calling animal control on his cat 3 separate times. One elderly woman broke down in tears recounting how Karen left a note on her front door after her husband died, demanding she trim the hedges to HOA standards. No HOA ever existed. Karen had built an empire on nothing but gall and glitter glue. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't bring photos or spreadsheets. I brought Archie. The judge allowed it as a demonstration after all. He was technically the alleged aggressor. He walked in with his service vest on, tail wagging, head held high. He made a beeline for the jury box and sat, tongue lolling, beside a young woman who instinctively scratched behind his ear. The jury smiled. One man chuckled. Someone actually sighed. Is this the same dog Miss Whitmore claims is a danger to society? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, I said. And I brought his vet records too. He's fully vaccinated, neutered, and he once donated blood to save another dog's life. Karen shrieked. That dog is a monster. The judge gavelled her down. Ms. Whitmore, she said firmly, if you disrupt this court again, you will be held in contempt. Karen slumped in her chair, muttering. It was unraveling, one strand at a time. The twist came when the DA introduced a surprise witness, Detective Lila Gordon. She'd been assigned to review Karen's digital activity after the arrest, and what she found was worse than anyone expected. Not only had Karen been impersonating HOA officials and animal welfare authorities, she'd also created dozens of fake email addresses to send complaints to local agencies, all from her own IP address. She wasn't just a fake HOA, she was the HOA. All of it. Every complaint, every letter, every warning, all Karen. She'd created a bureaucracy of one and used it to terrorize half the neighborhood. Gordon showed screenshots, traced metadata, even showed that Karen had signed fake names on witness reports. Names like Janet Freedom and Lola Barkman. Karen tried to argue she was protecting community values. The DA asked. By lying, Karen whispered. By leading. That did it. The judge recessed for deliberation. The jury didn't need long. 3 hours later, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts: impersonation, harassment, defamation, trespassing, and animal cruelty. The courtroom erupted gasps, murmurs. One guy in the back actually clapped before the bailiff hushed him. Karen sat stone-faced, eyes vacant, like she still couldn't process the word no. She was sentenced to 12 months in county jail and mandatory psychological evaluation. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about healing. Justice had finally stepped in. But the story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, Rosewood changed, for the better. We held the first ever Community Kindness Day. Kids painted kindness rocks. Mateo gave a speech about Archie. We planted trees along the main path and installed new park benches. The town council passed a motion to establish a real neighborhood committee with elected members and no power to fine, only support. I was asked to be on it. I said yes, because this time we'd build something on honesty, not fear. Karen's house went on the market. No one wanted it, not because of the structure, it was a decent property, but because it reeked of manipulation. Even with new paint, people remembered. They remembered the forged fines, the threats, the way she tried to break people under the mask of order. Eventually, a quiet couple bought it and turned it into a foster home for senior dogs. Fitting, somehow. The house once used to chase dogs out, now held them close. I didn't feel triumphant when I walked past it. I felt relief, not because I'd won, but because truth had spoken louder than fear, because community had triumphed over control, and because Archie, he never stopped wagging his tail. It's been a year now, 12 months since Karen was sentenced, 8 since she left Rosewood entirely. I'd like to tell you she changed the time inside. The therapy, the community backlash softened her heart, but the truth, she moved 2 counties over and tried to start another neighborhood initiative. It didn't last long. Word travels fast in small towns, and by the time her flyers hit mailboxes, people already knew the name Karen Whitmore, former HOA president of a place that never had one. She disappeared again after that, and honestly, that chapter's closed, because this isn't her story anymore. It's ours. In the time since the trial, Rosewood's changed not because we fought back, but because we chose to rebuild better. We created an official neighborhood welcome program run by volunteers, not enforcers. When someone new moves in, they don't get a list of rules, they get a pie, a map, and a handwritten note. Welcome home. The park, once overgrown and ignored, now has a fenced-in dog run. It's named Archie's Field. Mateo got to cut the ribbon with scissors twice his size. I still remember his little voice saying, "For the goodest boy." We host monthly community dinners, potlucks, no sign-up sheets, no committees, just people showing up, bringing dishes, laughing around fold-out tables. I see Priya and her wife dancing near the fire pit, DeLuca tossing a frisbee with his teen daughter. Mrs. Hanley, the widow Karen once bullied, playing checkers with Mateo under a shade tree. We're not perfect, but we're together, and that counts for something. As for me, business is booming, but that's not what matters. What matters is that people trust me now, not just as a vet, but as a neighbor. Parents bring their kids by to meet Archie. Local teachers ask me to visit schools and talk about animal care. I've helped rescue more than a dozen strays in the last few months alone. But the thing that means the most, a small sign outside my clinic. It says this is a community of compassion. No fake fines, just real kindness. One evening, just after closing, a knock echoed on my front door. It was the new neighbors, an older couple named Jean and Margaret, who bought Karen's old house. They'd heard rumors, of course, knew the history, but they wanted to ask for advice about adopting a dog. They said the energy in the house felt off, like it needed something softer. I invited them in. We talked about breeds, about rescues, about patience and healing. And 2 weeks later, they adopted Charlie, a wiry old terrier with a crooked tail and a bark like sandpaper. The first night, he barked at the hallway shadows. By the third, he was sleeping between them on the couch. Karen's house had a dog again. And this time, he was welcome. Sometimes justice doesn't come with handcuffs or courtrooms. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor bringing soup, A kid leaving a chalk drawing on your driveway? A town choosing empathy over ego? Karen thought authority meant control. We learned it meant service. She built fences. We built tables. A few weeks ago, I found an old note tucked into my mailbox. No return address. No name. Just 7 words, scribbled in shaky handwriting. Thank you for saving this neighborhood's heart. I stood on the porch for a long time, just holding it, thinking about how far we'd come, about all the nights I'd sat at that window, fuming over fake notices and barking accusations, about how close I'd come to giving up. But we didn't give up. And because of that, the heart kept beating. If you're reading this and you've got a Karen in your neighborhood, someone using fear to control, authority to intimidate, here's what I want you to know. You're not alone. You don't have to match their cruelty with cruelty, but you can stand firm. You can speak truth. And when enough people do, things change. Not overnight, but piece by piece. One dog park, one dinner table, one act of courage at a time. So let me ask you, have you ever seen your community stand up to injustice? What role did you play? What role will you play next time? Because if we want kinder streets, safer porches, and neighbors instead of enforcers, it starts with us and maybe a dog named Archie. Share your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with someone misusing fake authority? What would justice look like in your neighborhood? Let's talk about what real community means and how we can all protect it.